I told you it'd be worth it. Thank you, Reverend Barber.
Thank you. Thank them.
You know, a few years back, another dark time, maybe not quite as dark as this one, but I remember it was a dark time, and a friend of mine said, but you need to see what's happening in North Carolina. And I looked into it, and that friend was talking about Moral Mondays. And more recently, you have been part of the revival of the Poor People's Campaign. And I was very excited to hear about it and also curious. This thing that you played such a central role in building up in North Carolina, how could this translate across the country? And so that was the question one of the questions that I came to Santa Fe with, and then I heard you talk about Kansas. This thing that happened the other night, and it's been on my mind because folks may know that Mr. Trump had a rally in Kansas of a very different sort. Right. And so I wonder if you could talk more about your meeting in Kansas, because that, what produced that? What did that look like?
Well, Kansas was one of the states that joined in the 41 states that are part of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. You kind of have to say it all. And part of the history is, we say it was Dr. King's, but that too disables our ability to really continue. First of all, the Poor People's Campaign of '68 wasn't stopped, it was assassinated. They were killing presidents and presidential candidates and civil rights leaders. Dr. King was shot, neck was severed in Memphis with a deer rifle before he got to Washington, D.C. But Dr. King called together the group that people said he shouldn't. Even some black people said that he shouldn't. He called 25 people together: Jews, welfare rights workers, Jewish Federation, Catholics, people impacted by poverty. And he said, we have to stop separating civil rights, racism from the war, militarism, and bring them together. Now, that wasn't his first time. He had done that a lot of times before. So in the Moral Monday movement, we came to find out that in 2013, when the extremist legislature took over under the name of calling themselves Republican, but they weren't, because my grandfather was a Republican, a Lincoln Republican, and he didn't act like these people. This is not Republicanism. And because I would have to say, some of the things we fought for years for, we had to fight Democrats for. It took us 25 years to get same-day registration, early voting from Democrats. So I just always have to say that, because sometimes we have to work too hard with our friends and fight too much with our enemies. That's why I'm a registered independent. I choose how I want to vote. But anyway, from January to May, actually in the first 50 days, they attacked everybody. They had a supermajority and the governor. They denied health care, they denied living wages, they denied unemployment insurance extension. They went after the LGBTQ community, they went after Latino, they went after the women. And then during Easter week, they filed a voter suppression bill. It was Senate Bill 666.
Wow. It's a happy Easter from...
Now, the computer put that number on it. They didn't do it. The computer. And then they tabled it. And then after Easter, they took out one part of it and filed, it's called House Bill 589, and it was just the extreme photo ID, right, portion. Even though North Carolina had the best protection laws called signature attestation, nobody had ever violated it. For the most part, you sign your name, you get a 5-year felony if you lie. And we said, if they're going to crucify the sick, the poor, the women, the gay people, and then crucify voting rights, every crucifixion needs a witness. And so in April, the last Monday in April, we decided to go into the legislature. Now they told us, you cannot come in the legislature, you cannot protest in the area between the two doors, you cannot quote scripture, you cannot bring a placard. Like, no, you can't tell us who came up with these rules. We did. Well, we said that's not in the Constitution. The Constitution actually said that the Constitution in North Carolina actually demands that people come. So 17 of us went in, 7 preachers and other people, and one lady who's a paraplegic. They let us talk for about an hour, and then they arrested even that woman in that wheelchair. And the next week people came. The next week, till about the end of the summer, it was 900 and some odd people had come. Now, here's the story. Moral Monday, even though each Monday had a theme, we did that to connect the issues, right? Because they wanted people to be separated. So we went all over the state showing people, because we would go in a community, say that was predominantly white, and they would say, well, we don't really need that Medicaid expansion because that's Obamacare. We said, you realize that's a racial name, that they did that for a reason. Did you know 1,000 people in your county are without health care? And it can't be any black people because there are no black people up here. And they would say, no, I didn't know that. Did you know that the same guy you voted for that said he would be against gay people and be against and be for prayer in the school and that would stop people from cheating in the vote also voted to cut the money for public education, and you're losing 36 jobs in your we didn't know that. So, And so then we put that, now on the other side we had to say to black people, because there were some black folks that said, you president of NAACP, you're supposed to look out for black people. I said the NAACP didn't even start out as black. It was mostly white when it was founded. And it's supposed to focus on justice. And what we say is, when people say, is it race or class, we say it is. I mean, and so by doing that way, and then by framing it not as Democrat, not as Republican, but as moral, and not moral just from a religious standpoint. Some people religious, some people constitutional, but people were able to come in, they were able to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience together. So some days, one story is when we had two ladies, one was 90 years old, the other 90 years old, they were 92. Two old white ladies who joined hands, they were on walkers, and I said, y'all don't have to go. And they said, shut up, we know what we're doing. And I said, well, okay then. And then they said, when we were little girls, they wouldn't let us do this. But we know what's up, we know the game. And so they went in and got arrested together. And they led 157 other people in that day. And so what happened real quickly is by the 6th week, the governor's number had dropped from over 50% to under 40, he never recovered. When we started, the major newspapers were laughing at us. By the end of 6 weeks, they were all writing editorials that we were right. And we had reframed the narrative. And it continued for 4 years. And then we registered thousands of new voters. Then we built a legal team to fight against what they had done. And what people often don't say about Moral Monday, we won. We won in the South. We turned back North Carolina's racist voter suppression law. And it was so much of a victory that the Supreme Court had to agree with the Fourth Circuit that it was surgical racism. Now, when the racists have to agree with when the racists have to vote against the racists, that's pretty good when you make a case. You know. But not only that, by registering new voters, the governor, who was the leader of that crowd, got a little vacation to go think about his morality. Right? And we won gerrymandering, so this coming election, we have the first opportunity to recapture the state legislature. And that didn't happen overnight. Now, why could it spread? Because if we don't deal with these state capitals, we aren't serious about changing American politics. Because the vote is suppressed in state capitals. Denying living wages happens in state capitals. Bad incarceration laws standing in state capitals. Public education money to state capitals. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And too often what we've done is focus just on the president or just on the Senate and Congress, when in fact the state capitals. Now, how have the extremists won in state capitals? They have separated people by this right, left, or they've separated people by race. And what the moral movement says is we have to have this intersectional movement to deal with these interlocking injustices. And what we found when we brought that into the Poor People's Campaign, that people are ready for it, man. And we teach it empirically and emotionally. You know, we teach it emotionally by, when we have our session, we pull your finger and we try to pull it off and see if you want your mouth open. And we say, see, it's all connected. But then we also show that if there are 140 million poor people, and the majority of them in America are white, but the largest percentage of them are black, and if there are large numbers of poor people in every race and every ethnicity, and if the same people that are keeping, you know, guaranteeing incomes and health care and living wages from the poor people, if they're fighting together, why are we all separated? We went up to Eastern Kentucky and talked about it. Why are we separated? The other night I found out in Kansas that real quickly, in Missouri, we had Missouri, that there were some farmers, a nurse told us of farmers, that throw themselves into their columbine and kill themselves, but it ought to be called accidental death, just so that their families can get insurance because they're so broke. Now, I don't care if that person's a cattleman from Missouri or a black woman from Mississippi. The bottom line is the same people that are denying health care in Missouri, the same mindset in Missouri are doing in Mississippi. So if they are cynical enough to be together, why aren't we smart enough to come together?
Right.
And why would we allow people to continue to separate us? So we actually put the numbers up empirically, and then I say things to people, and we go in and talk. I said, look, you know, you can let these people fool you and say that black people are getting all this free stuff and that's why you're poor. Let me tell you something. The bottom line is if you're black and you're poor, and you're white and you're poor, and you're Latino and you're poor, and you're Asian and you're poor, and you're Native and you're poor, and you can't pay your light bill, we all black in the dark. So if we're gonna be black in the dark, we ought to be together in the light. You see what I'm saying? You know,
good.
A baby, when that baby cries because their parents can't feed them, that baby doesn't cry white, doesn't cry black, it doesn't cry Latino, it cries pain. Now, lastly, that doesn't mean though you don't deal with the race issue.
Right.
Because you cannot deal with this American project without dealing with both race and class, right? And intersection. The thing we're trying to show folk is that voting rights is as much an issue for poor white people and working and low wealth white people as it is for black people, because the very people that get elected through racial voter suppression and lie about people cheating to get you to agree with them on passing bills to suppress the vote are the same people that keep living wages out your pocket. And that's the piece that we have to engage, and that's how we do it. And by adding the moral critique, you know, some progressives got so mad at Jerry Falwell and all them, they just threw religion and morality, you know, out the door. And then some churches got to the place where the real issue isn't church versus the state, it's church versus the state of the people. There's no connection between what happens in church and synagogues and places and what's actually happening to the people. But every major religion, if you read them, says that the primary moral issues ought to be, how is that religion speaking to the nation as it relates to the issues of poverty, hunger, sickness, being despised because you're an outsider? As Howard Thurman says, the ultimate question of life is where do you stand in relationship to the rejected and the despised and the disinherited?
Wow. I got another question for you, speaking about intersectionality and what people are ready for. You gave an incredible speech tonight. I know that a week or two ago, you gave another incredible speech in St. Paul at the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights Conference as a keynote. And in doing that, you are in good company with other black public intellectuals like Angela Davis, Cornel West, Alice Walker, who have also championed the question of Palestine and Palestinian rights. And I wonder if you could say why you gave that speech and what, you know, this is talked about, when it's talked about at all in this country, it's talked about as this distant thing. Why is this relevant for people like us here?
Well, I would say that in that speech, and I talked a lot to my good friend Phyllis Bennis, I talked some to Cornell, I talked to a number of people, even rabbis that I know, and imams. Because when I was invited, I was humbled by the invitation. But I decided to do something a little different than just go in and give a political speech about Palestine. I wanted to talk about humanity and raise the first question of both the Judeo-Christian teaching, and that is, what does it mean to believe that everybody, whether they're Jewish, Palestinian, Hindu, whatever, they're all made in the image of God? What is our responsibility? Because governments, states don't have rights, people do. They have human rights. And then I wanted to look at it through the lens of my own history, my own DNA, and the challenges of my history. The first Civil Rights Act that I was a part of or Human Rights Act was when I was born, and my father would not allow the hospital to put on my birth certificate simply Negro. He said, that's not who he is. His grandmother was, and others were, full-blooded Tuscarora natives, people, First Nation, who had their land stolen, who were wiped away. His other people are white people who worked with black people, mulattoes, free issue black people, during slavery, built alliances. And so I have cousins that are as blue-eyed and blonde-haired as any white person in this room. The trauma, the genocide of the First Nation people, and the terrible genocide and chattel slavery of black people, I felt like gave me a particular lens to talk about policies that traumatize anybody's humanity. And to say to Jewish people, even those that I would hope you would join with this, and if it was happening to Jewish people, we would say the same thing. Right. Because of the imago Dei. I wanted to look back at how some of the early development of extreme Zionism had nothing to do with the Holocaust. It was way before then. And also that there were Jewish forces who disagreed. I wanted to talk some to Palestinian people about the way of nonviolence and not coming from people who had not had to use it, but from people who had to stand up against power and face death, but yet chose, there's a preacher from the 1850s that says, even in slavery, you must choose who's going to be your God, the way of the slave master, the way of God. You have to choose how you're going to respond even to the evil so that you don't become the evil. And so I wanted to be very clear. And then I wanted to say from that human perspective, not a political speech, it was a moral speech, it was from my faith. Then America, if you know a new law is being passed that is nothing more but modern day apartheid law in Israel, it's just like, you have to call apartheid is apartheid, apartheid. I don't care what people it's against, it's apartheid. Call it what it is. And if your money, if your military machinery is in any way being used by extremists to destroy and maim and kill people, human beings who are made in the image of God, then that has to be challenged, right? So that's the perspective I wanted to come. I wanted really, my degree is in pastoral care and public policy. I wanted to give a pastoral, very pastoral and prophetic speech, not based in anybody's ideology per se, not based in one group or another, but strictly from this perspective. If I, and the faith I declare, believes that everybody is created in the image of God, the imago Dei, then any policy or effort or action that I engage in that destroys, demeans, and degrades them is a violation against God and the person. And maybe if we started there in wrestling with, because what has happened is the policies have suggested that the Palestinians, just like the policies of America suggested that the Pueblo people and the First Nation people and my people and the policies of America once suggested that black people are a subspecies. And that, my friends, is something worse than a political decision. When you choose to act in a way that sees other people as subhuman or less than or second-class humanity, you have opened a gate which leads to evils that are unimaginable. And whether you're Jewish, Palestinian, or other, you should want to stand against that.
I mean, that framework, and particularly what you ended on, the kind of violence that's possible when you dehumanize people, When you say that, I can't help but think about the caging of children and separation of families at the border. Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk more about, just in the few minutes we have left, the kind of dehumanization that's taking place in this time, but also this fight that you're waging to locate humanity and to assert it.
Now, I will say some things tonight that will sound strange to your audience because we often get locked into the issue of the day by the media, which is part of the problem of the moral narrative in this country. Even the so-called liberal media, because they get fixated on one issue and we don't do the linkages. So here's the thing we have to do. The violence against the children being snatched at the border did not start with them. The gate was opened earlier. Okay. Coretta Scott King said one time when she was asked what did she think about violence in the light of the fact that her husband had been shot violently, and she stopped for a minute, looked and said, well, you know, that is violence, but that's not the only violence. She said, denying people housing is violence. Denying health care is violence. Denying people's culture is violence. Keeping people from education is violence. Denying living wages is violence. Blocking people's right to organize as unions is violence. Hurting people because of their sexuality is violence. Destroying people because of their immigrant status is violence. And then she said, and then there's another form of violence, an apathetic attitude that refuses to address the other violence. So how do you get these kids being snatched and there's hardly, and the whole country is not basically shut down? How do you get to the place where it can be done to brown children, and you know that would not have happened if all those kids were white and being locked up, or well-off people? They could be white or black, but if they were wealthy, how do you get there? Well, the violence of denying health care. Let's see how far we can go. People died and bled for the voting rights. Let's see if we can undo that. That's a form of political violence. Let's see if we can talk about cutting food stamps. That's a form of violence. Let's see if we can make people say you need to work in order to get things, but then we don't create jobs so they can work. That's a form of violence. Denying living wages is violence. Sending people to war for profit, violence. Let's see how much we see. You've opened the gate.
Right.
And if there is apathy, political apathy. You heard me say we had 26 presidential debates. Even in the primary, 140 million people living in poverty, 43.5% of your population. And even in the primary, even in the Democrat-Republican primary, not 1 hour on poverty. Not one full debate committed to poverty. Not one full debate committed to voting rights. That's a form of political apathy or political distancing. Most politicians don't even say the word poor. They act like it's a disease. They got this strange neoliberalism that if you just focus on the middle class, everything will be all fine. And for God's sake, we don't talk about race until somebody says something stupid like the N-word. We don't talk about the racial impact of politics. All of those become forms of violence where the gate has been opened. So once you open the gate and people don't push back hard, well, let's try doing this to these children.
So we got to push back hard.
See the gate, you come down the stairwell, come down the escalator, and stand up and say all Mexican are racist and da 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 da.
Right.
And the media play with that, you've opened the gate. Right. And if politicians don't stand up, not as left, right, Democrat, Republican, but challenge it and be willing to go to the mat, morally, you open the gate. And once that gate is open, things can happen that are unimaginable. Right? Our work now is to say, well, it has happened before. But in every age, people have said, it's enough. And they've chosen to be on the side of nonviolence, truth, and love, and rather than on the side of violence. So the Poor People's Campaign, Repairs the Breach, the work we're trying to do is to say, we will not live apathetically watching all of this policy violence going on and not mobilize together and find every person we can of every race, creed, color, and sexual orientation until we find the remnant. One writer says all you have to do is get 1 to 2% of any nation's population to engage in a kind of moral narrative and moral nonviolent action, and you can transform the direction of that nation. Not 10%, not 15%, not 20%, but if you can just get 1 or 2% to say, wait a minute, close the gate to violence, close the gate to injustice, not on our watch. We may not change everything, but we're not going to be apathetic. We may not change things tomorrow, but if we don't do anything but sow the seeds for what happens. Rosa Parks sat down on a seed that had been sown long ago. And so I don't know, I really don't know, if the work we're trying to do now is the seed or the actual plant that's coming up from other seeds. What I do know is, as for me and my house, there's no other reason for me to be alive than to join with people of all different races, colors, creeds, and sexualities, and non-violently address the violent issues of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and to take on the heresy of religious nationalism, and to be a part of life rather than a part of policies of death.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
I want to thank you so much, Reverend.
Thank you, Dan.
I want to say you are going to sign some books, right? Okay. So I will remind everybody to come out again, David Harvey and Laura Flanders, in a couple weeks. Yep. Thanks again to Reverend Barber, and he will stick around to sign some books. Thank you all.
Thank you all.